Welcome to the Karmic Mirror podcast, brought to you by Fifth Line Studios. In this space, we unravel the profound wisdom tucked within the folds of the self-help world and present it to you in a way that resonates with the heart of the collective.
Our mission is to seamlessly bridge the gap between esoteric knowledge and practical tools for everyday life. Whether you're a seasoned seeker or just beginning your path, join us and uncover the magic within and around you. Tune in and let the journey begin. Hi everyone, and welcome back to this series on the nervous system. I'm Michelle.
I'm Allie. Welcome back, everyone.
Today we are getting into the mind, and as I mentioned, this nervous system series is all about building awareness and more understanding, as well as getting into some of the modalities and practices to help us regulate the nervous system. In episode 1, we explored the complexities of the nervous system, so if you haven't listened to that one, definitely go back. And today we are diving into the connection between our mind and our nervous system.
So as Michelle said, definitely go back, listen to that nervous system episode that we first recorded, because it really dives into the why of the nervous system and why it's so important for self-love, self-care, self-growth, all of the good things that Karmic Mirror promotes here. Definitely take a listen to that. And today we'll be diving into the mind, navigating the cognitive landscape, realm, space. And we'll start by talking through, we have the initial opener in the series, which is that intro to the nervous system. Today we'll be focusing on the mind, and later to come are the body and the spirit. And so we will start by talking a little bit about why we picked those three areas and the connectedness amongst those. We'll talk about some areas of the brain and its functioning that we really found relevant in understanding the connection between the nervous system and the mind. And then, as Michelle said, which is really cool to me, it's that those areas of maybe action items, of modalities or areas that can positively impact the mind as you're working on regulating the nervous system. Okay, so let's start out. Mind, body, and spirit. Those will be the three that we're focusing on, at the later part of this, not the later part, but we have the intro and then the three areas. And so, Michelle, we talk about mind, body, and spirit. Why those, and the nervous system? We were talking about it a little bit earlier. Why those three?
Yeah, I think you talked about the interconnectedness of the mind, the body, spirit. When we recorded the nervous system episode, we kind of talked a little bit about how each one influences one another. And so regulating the nervous system is all about balance. And I think the natural places to look are obviously our mind, our racing thoughts, our mental triggers, our body, where we physically feel things, our sensations, how our brain's communicating to our nervous system, how we feel it is, a physical response. But talking about the spirit is also really important too, because once you get to baseline, once you can operate maybe from a more healthy, regulated nervous system, or you kind of, or working towards that, or I would say it's a constant practice, but then, what else, right? Like, I think that spirit involves meaning and purpose and all of those wonderful things that we are so blessed to be able to, realize in this lifetime, if we're so lucky to. And so
yeah. And the three areas, what I think you'll see a little bit woven through the next three topics of mind, body, and spirit, is because there is this interconnectedness between the three. There may be some modalities or topics that lend themselves to one or more area. However, we fit those into where we thought it might make the most sense, looking at the collective series and content of the nervous system. And so diving in, thank you for highlighting the spirit, but the mind and body connection. Yeah. I think that will resonate with a lot of people. Talk to us, Michelle, about just that connection. So, because I think it's important to consider when doing work on the mind for your nervous system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. I think we were talking about this. Like, one of the most common things I hear, or maybe it's buzzy, but it's so real, is like my spiraling thoughts, or I'm in a spiral, or whatever that means. And that's such a mental process. And so I think about the physical response to that, or to just that really common experience that so many people have. And so the mind and body connection, it's that relationship, it's your mental processes, it's and your physical responses within your nervous system. So today we were talking, well, not even today, but we talked a little bit about different examples that we could share that would kind of illustrate that process. And such a, really current one, relevant, is the anticipation of a job interview. What is the mental process of leading up to a job interview? What are the physical responses that your body undergoes as a result of that entire process?
Mm-hmm. And it's this, I had a recent example of this, and we were kind of thinking through, and the best way and why we wanted to start with mind is to think about it this way. As soon as you have that interview and you have the details, what is going on? Your mind is thinking about it, and it's evoking whatever physical reaction or feelings in your body, right? Could be nerves, could be, even calmness would be a reaction, right? To get a sense of your nervous system. But you're starting to feel all of these feelings in your body, and the nervousness might bring up, right, like sweaty palms, like a little bit of shaky palms, or increased heart rate, whatever that could look very different for different people.
Yeah.
But you're not in the interview at that moment, right? It may not be for a couple of weeks. And so that's just a direct correlation of how important this regulation of your mind and the nervous system can play into just the overall well-being of like your mind, body, and spirit, because that can directly impact that. And so I think, was that kind of what we were diving into?
Yeah, for sure. And just talking about that whole experience, right? Like, I think the big thing for me talking about the connection is just building awareness, just like having awareness of what the physical sensations feel like in your body is so important. It's also really important to understand what triggered that physical response. So understanding the way our mind works. And I think the job interview is such a easy and just, like a really broad example, because we can experience both fear, anxiety, and excitement, and and that can come with a mixed bag of like different thoughts, and some of them blur the line of what it feels like, because we're just not aware yet of what it feels like in our body. And so building that awareness to be able to tune into, okay, like, yes, I'm a little bit scared in this moment, but also I'm super excited, and it kind of both feels like sweaty palms, but how do I create the awareness and then move through that, or use it to my benefit, right? Like in the example of the job interview, how do I take my fear and also excitement and channel it into being super prepared so that I can show up confident? So I think it's a really important piece to understand.
So the one we were diving in, I think the reason why the interview came up because of the case study that I had to do that I was telling you about, where and it's interesting to think about this as well. So if I were to go to, let's just say like corporate America, regular, same level role title of experience I've had in an interview, I've done so many that I'm not as nervous about it, right? But this one was a case study. So they were sending me this case study. I had an hour to put together like a marketing plan, priority pushes of products, a reorg of my team, training of my team, strategies with financials and metrics. Those are set up to put you in high stress situations.
Yeah, totally.
It was such a trip to see how my nervous system responded to that. Yeah. And now I had already been aware of this kind of work. But leading into it, I had on a personal side, like kind of some things that were triggering that morning that didn't really have to do with that. But then getting put in that really high stress impact. By the time I was presenting this to the board members, I could not think of really common words, like margin. I remember that was when I'm sitting there going, and I couldn't think about it. I mean, my hands were clenching up. I like couldn't grab my water. I even knocked my water and spilled it. I mean, but here's what my brain was doing. It was like, you can't do this. You can't do this. Mm-hmm. And so because I had done a little bit of work on the nervous system and understanding, your ego, your mind, because all the data, going back to the initial episode of your brain, it's meant to keep you safe. So they're like, in my mind, it's like red flags, and I was just shutting down because, and that's the work that I will continue to do, is like, why would that have caused such a shutdown? What were the maybe trauma or the triggers or the root? But I think it's a really interesting example of that is something as of late where it all started in that mind, but I could see it slowly trickling to just like physically, So it's a good thing we're starting with the mind.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it reminds me of what we said, in our last episode talking about the nervous system was like, that regular practice of nervous system regulating is really, really vital. And also it's even more important to practice in those stressful moments to like gather yourself. And that's where the awareness, but also like, I don't know what we said last time, but it was something about, creating more compassion to show up for yourself with more compassion, with more grace, right? Like, yes, this is the physical reaction. And now I understand so clearly that doesn't really mean anything other than my body is just responding the way my body is known to respond for so long. And then you get to like move on, or whatever the, next thing is. But I just think that's
the
really
follow through, and you'll talk a little bit as we transition into just the cognitive functions in the brain for sure. But what my brain did in that situation, because I mean, I was literally, I was laughing. I was like, okay, when they call me and tell me I don't get this gig, I'm just literally going to laugh and be like, I totally get it. And what did it do for my neural pathways when like less than an hour later, they're like, oh, can we meet today to talk about this or tomorrow? And without, and the call was so complimentary and I got the gig. And so that is a real life example of how it shifts my neural pathways to be like, oh, this is safe. This is safe, right?
100%. Yeah, I love that. And so talking about neural pathways, I think it's super important to have a really basic understanding of how the brain works because we're talking about the mind and the nervous system. So just thinking about how the brain functions will just touch really high level on some key cognitive functions. This is how our brain processes information, right? So if we break it out into three kind of sections, right? You have your memory. This is your brain's storage system. It's how you remember things like where you put your keys, the words to your favorite songs.
The word margin.
Attention. This is your focus mode. So being able to concentrate on a conversation when there's, a busy, loud environment around you, that's your attention. And then you have your perception. And so this is how your brain interprets the world. So how do you interpret a beautiful sunset or the taste of your favorite food? And so your brain processes information like a supercomputer. And so let's say you're reading a book. This is how your brain is analyzing, it's interpreting, understanding, and creating a mental picture of what you're taking in. And so bringing that back to neural pathways, which I think is the real connector here with the nervous system. And so your neural pathways, well, you want to talk a little bit about it? Where I was like,
I mean, I think it's something where I get the concept of it and it's really impactful, and there's lots of, To Be Magnetic, and Dr. Tara Stewart, who has research backed in the To Be Magnetic manifestation process, talks a lot about neural pathways, which was my introduction to that. But I think understanding in the brain, you were articulating it so beautifully in the perception. Here's how it relates to me to the nervous system, right? Yeah. Is those early years, which is why 0 to 7 is so important. And, you can almost think about trauma in those areas of you have perceived something to be one way and it that's where it lives in your brain. And so you can oftentimes relate something. So let's think of my job interview, right? And having that reaction to then say, like, what's at the root of that? And from the best of my ability, it's like around being seen, around, maybe it's imposter syndrome, but then it's really at what point did my perception tell me that being seen was unsafe? Because that's how my nervous system is reacting to being seen. So I think understanding that there are ways for those neural pathways to be switched and changed is why it's important to talk about this in the space of the nervous system and the mind.
Yeah, for sure. I love bringing it back to the perception piece. I don't think I would have gone there. No, it definitely, the neurons fire together. No. And I think in the simplest form, I always think of the first way that that neural pathways were described to me as like a road in your mind, and you've driven that road so many times. It's like handwriting, and that's why we'll talk later about journaling, and then we'll talk about journaling a million times because it's my favorite hobby. But for many, handwriting with your dominant hand was one of the first skills that you learn, and so that is like one of the strongest neural pathways in your mind, and that's why journaling and writing things is such a great mental process. And so I thought about it in that way. So it takes retraining your brain, retraining your body and your nervous system to shift gears rather than going down that road your brain's been down a million times, right? Because your brain wants the fastest, the easiest route from A to B. They don't want to take the harder road, which is often the more healthy, balanced road for us. So it takes that retraining and driving the new path over and over again so that you can build a new neural pathway. That's how but I love, I think that's kind of like
I think as like a 101, hopefully that makes sense. Terms. And of course, as always, we will put some links to resources and that we have found helpful in understanding the neural pathways in the brains. Again, it is so impactful, but we'll provide resources so that you can find what speaks to you and maybe resonates with you.
Yeah, for sure. I love that analogy because it just works so easily for me, or it's visual, but just bringing it back to the nervous system. Why is it super important to understand the way your brain works in relation to the nervous system? Well, thinking about your processes like memory, attention, perception, these are what contribute in the context of your nervous system. This contributes to how we learn, how we focus, how we interpret the world around us. And the brain's processes and our neural pathways, those help us shape our ability to adapt and respond to new information, to our environment, to our experiences, and also, importantly, how we respond to triggers or being activated, or our nervous system feeling out of balance. How do we respond appropriately to the experience?
And if you think about it, we won't, and again, we will say we're not licensed professionals. And so thinking back, we touched a little bit in our intro, things on an ongoing basis where your nervous system is dysregulated or maybe not healed from a traumatic event or thing in your life, right? If that's impacting your current day attention, memory, and perception, hopefully we're tying it back to why really focusing on a regulated nervous system is just so important and impactful to just your overall well-being, because without those things, you could let it play out in any world. It's not, right? It's not beneficial to a really awakened present way of living, if that's your goal. And then emotional intelligence was another area that we had kind of talked about in the mind. Talk to me a little bit about just your thoughts in emotional intelligence and maybe how that relates to the balance, like a balanced nervous system. Where does your brain go when we talk about that?
Well, the first place my brain goes is not to my notes. It's to that little sequence of like your thoughts create your, feelings, create your action and the outcome. I'm missing one of these in the sequence, but that's really my thought process when we link our mental response or our mind and our nervous system with emotional intelligence. It's because they're so closely linked.
Yeah. And if I were to say, what is emotional intelligence, Michelle? how might you describe that?
So this is your ability to navigate and regulate your feelings. And it is one, in really being able to regulate and manage your emotions is the most powerful defense against stressors. And that's not like, positivity, all the time, or whatever you want to call it.
So like spiritual bypassing of, oh, look how healed and how happy I am all the time.
Yeah,
and how I can like hear. Yeah,
like that's not managing your emotions. It's not regulating your emotions. That's just bypassing them or sugarcoating them, for lack of a better word, or maybe a great word. But yeah, it's just having an understanding of your own emotions and also others' emotions. That's really important to nervous system balance. It's important to all of the things, but
yeah, so that's just another area kind of to keep in mind of, and that impacts your nervous system as well. Again, touching on, imagine if your emotional intelligence is just impacted because you are living out of a place of a dysregulated nervous system. Chances are you would see your stress levels increase. That would most likely cause some reactionary behaviors from your own emotions, from other people's emotions, because you're very dysregulated. Good news is that emotional intelligence is something that can be learned even as an adult. So it's a cool way of, thinking about that's an area that you could continue if you felt called to dive into and learn a little bit more about. I know some corporations will give emotional intelligence.
Yeah, well, because,
training.
Sorry to cut in, but like, I think the statistic is like, well, no, I'm going to butcher the statistic, but I want to say
there's a statistic out there.
Yeah, I want to say it's like 15% of like career or professional success is like learn like hard skills versus like, yeah, I did the math wrong. But yeah, like 75% of your professional success is centered around interpersonal skills, soft skills. And so emotional intelligence being arguably the most important soft skill we can learn is having awareness of our own emotions. And it's not even some huge, massive undertaking. Literally, emotional intelligence can be making a commitment to every time you feel really your growth edges or your comfort level or your all of the things you bump up against something really uncomfortable or you're triggered. I don't want to overuse that word because I think it's really important to use it in context of...
Is it triggering to always use the word trigger?
Well,
for sure. We want to use it sparingly.
That's exactly it. And I think I'll use the word activated, but for me, I always think about it as like, am I just really uncomfortable? In those moments, it can be as simple as literally taking a deep breath so that you can pause the spiral, the mental process that's happening as a result of like an emotion perhaps, and give yourself a moment to just tune into what you're feeling. That is cultivating emotional intelligence, and it's not impossible. It can be done in literal seconds or in the moment.
And that maybe gets into like practical tips, but since we're here, I would say if you work in an organization and they're offering courses on EQ, emotional intelligence, raise your hand, go in. And I think the biggest gap I've seen with my background from emotional intelligence courses is like the application. So it's also people learn about it, but then it's really applying that knowledge to your life and making that a part of your behaviors where that will positively impact that nervous system. So anyways, maybe we digress a little bit here, but I think maybe that's a logical transition since I was talking about like you can take classes and certainly that would help with your nervous system. But we also want to highlight in these 3 series of mind, body, and spirit therapeutic modalities and practices that really can help with that nervous system area of the mind. And like we said, again, let me preface that some of these, for those very Virgos like me or have Virgo strong in their chart, you might say, but that could be in body, Michelle and Allie, or that feels more spirit to me. We know. Remember that whole interconnectedness before. So we'll touch on these, and chances are if you think maybe something should land in mind, we might have it placed in body or spirit. But when we talk about the mind, this one seems quite obvious. I'll let Michelle dive a little bit deeper. It's well suited in this particular podcast of mindfulness and meditation. Can you walk us through that journey of how it positively impacts our mind and subsequently the nervous system?
Okay, I think I can.
Well, I know you can, or I wouldn't have lobbed that one over to you.
All right, so we'll start with mindfulness. So, being fully present, fully engaged in the current moment. Some will say without judgment, just being the observer. And how that works with the nervous system is, we talked about rewiring your neural pathways. So if we're constantly in a state of worrying about the future, right? We're not in the present moment. And what is that feeling? I think a lot of people maybe can think about or feel, maybe like I felt it in my body just now, just saying that, like what it feels like to constantly be worried about the future or mulling over the past, right? We're not in the present moment. And what does that do, like I said, to your body, to your emotions? And so regulating the nervous system does involve a lot of bringing it back to the present moment. What are you really experiencing right now in this moment? And so mindfulness can look like, we said, tuning into the physical sensations of your body. That can take a moment, and it can be taking a moment to take that deep breath so that you can connect to, oh, do I feel a little tightness in my stomach, or do I feel it somewhere else? What is that? And just getting present. That's mindfulness. Like, at its baseline, it's so simple, but it takes doing it, practicing it over and over, because I don't think you ever reach a state. I think you just have to come back to it. You have to come back, return back to yourself.
To me, it's almost like, and we were talking about this as we were prepping for this episode. It's almost where presence and mindfulness is the goal, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, because it'll give you such a balance. Mm-hmm. And we say that a lot, right? The goal is not, we will never eliminate all stressors, and not all stressors are bad, right? But it's just to help you have those more balanced.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Like just stopping your mind from going at a rate that's faster than your body can catch up to. We talk about what is regulate. It's finding balance. And so if they're going at such different speeds, of course, you're going to feel totally out of whack. And then meditation, we could get into mindfulness all day, like literally just Google anything mindfulness in minutes or micro mindfulness.
Yeah.
And you'll have a whole
heard
slew.
a thing. Have you heard this? And I want to get it right, but that from an evolutionary standpoint, our brains are meant to process what's going on in our community, in our neighborhood, but yet as humans now, we have access to what is going on in everyone's community across the world. And so it is kind of this physiological thing of our brains maybe are not meant to be processing so much. So that to me feels, I mean, that's personally for me, it hinders my mindfulness and being present when I have an overload of information coming.
Yeah, super sensory overload. And I think that's why, and people tend to think of like, well, I say people, but I think some people tend to think mindfulness, meditation is like this undertaking you have to do a certain way or whatever. We can be present and experiencing mindfulness washing the dishes. I actually love to just be like, okay, let me pause, let me sit. I don't love silence. I love music in the background. I love a vibe, a mood, but there are certain things where I'm like, let me just sit in silence or stand here and just wash dishes. And it's such a little intellectual vacation for your brain where it's not doing all this heavy processing. You're just focused on the task in front of you. And so it can be that simple, literally turning off the things or just letting yourself do the one thing that's in front of you that's super cool. So anyways, and talking about meditation, I think that can go into a million different categories because there are a million different ways to meditate. But again, going back to what meditation as a practice can do, depending on the modality or the style of meditation, what it can do for rewiring your neural pathways, for creating new ways of being that align with that kind of balanced, regulated state of being in your nervous system that we'd really like to be at. So exploring what that looks like.
If we were to say, and I'm totally putting you on the spot here, but if I were to say, how would you define meditation?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I think focusing your mind on, and that's not true because some will be like I don't know, people tend to think meditation is like, I have to clear my mind of thoughts. It's like, I have to just focus on, at least for me, is bringing my mind back to where I am, back to my body, bringing my energy back to my body. And then, you know, depending on what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, using that space, using that presence or that moment of presence of that space or energy I've created to kind of, I think realign with what, like, whatever that is. Is it your inner voice, or is it something that you're planting, a seed you're planting of your, you know, there's so many different ways. Does that help?
It does. I think it's an area that's been so interesting to me. I think especially through the manifestation work of To Be Magnetic. They do deep imaginings and meditations, but I think traditionally, which is why I hope people listening in are of that mindset of wanting to learn and expand. And I think before I got into, you know, different bodies of work and modalities, to me, meditation is traditionally sitting in silence. And for people who might have overactive brains or bodies and can't sit still, I know that the definition is more inclusive than just that, sure. But it's been a cool journey of exploring what meditation might be, and it can be while in body movement or washing the dishes, or because I think you did, I won't even try to regurgitate what you said. I think it was a beautiful way to be inclusive of different practices of meditation, but ultimately you got to the root of what I think meditation is supposed to be.
One, I think we always think of meditation as like getting into a deep state of relaxation. And I think that's totally true. I just think, like you said, we all have different paths to that. So like sometimes I do need to just like we get out and go for a walk that is, you know, a walking meditation, right? Like I'm not on my phone. I'm not listening to anything. I'm paying attention to the way my feet feel on the ground. I'm listening to everything going on around me. And then I'm, you know, just present, and I need that. Or sometimes it's a breath work as meditation because I'm just too jittery to sit still. And so I think everyone has different paths to that. Sometimes it's guided meditation to have someone else help you get to that state, help you get to, you know, even whatever that feels like for you, which is really cool. I love exploring all the different types of meditation.
Yeah, and in a lot of them, it's whether it's mantras, which I wasn't intentionally trying to lead us to the next ones, but I know that sometimes, you know, chanting different mantras or those deep imaginings are really creating visualizations for you to go back. That's that changing of the neural pathways that will help your nervous system perceive threats, dangers. Remember what we were saying in the first one, where it was like, when you're not when you're activated, but when you're not, saying, did the reaction match the circumstance? And if it didn't, then that's where the adjusting of the neural pathways in this type of work will positively impact you. So mantras, how do you use mantras in your work?
For everything in my life. No, but I also think it brings me back to the cognitive functions, right? Like meditation, mindfulness, all of it is about your focus, your attention, your perception, right? Like that's really the core. Like you're focusing your awareness on the present moment. You're shifting your attention to this thing or to the practice, or in this case, we're talking about mantra. That's all about your focus. And you can interpret a mantra in different ways. I think it's really important to think about a common understanding or interpretation of mantra would be like a word or a statement, you know, like an I am statement, and it's different from an affirmation, but really focusing on that statement or that word in meditation. But then you can also think about where mantra originates, right? In ancient cultures, and I think the very first mantra is the Gayatri mantra, which is around 1500 BCE. So you can see how deeply far back mantra goes, where we're talking about maybe you don't understand the word, the mantra, but there's a sound current, a vibration. And so, you know, and I won't get too into it, but I think that's really different ways to approach mantra that are going to mean different things for different people. If you really want to understand the maybe cultural or the roots of mantra, if that's your practice. Like I use mantra. So you asked, in my personal life, I practice Kundalini, and Kundalini, one of the aspects of Kundalini yoga is mantra as a vibration. And so when I chant a mantra or I play a mantra, which is a lot of the time I love to just play mantra music in the background, I think that I mentioned just having music as a part of my environment all the time, and sometimes we can unconsciously listen to music and we forget that words and sound current have such an impact on our body, or on our emotions, on everything. So I'll consciously try to listen to more mantra because I know what I'm channeling into my environment. And when we chant in Kundalini, you're really chanting this mantra, and it's almost like, if I could, it goes so deeper than this. So, you're almost like channeling or pushing this mantra into your aura. You're strengthening your magnetic force field through
your energy and your mantra. Vibrations, for sure.
Yeah, through chanting. Or maybe you're doing something like Long Ekongkar, which is a butcher the pronunciation, but
I wouldn't even have known. You should have just rolled with it. I still would have felt like, what? So what is this thing you speak of?
But, this particular mantra, you're really, as you're chanting each syllable, or you're chanting and you're activating through your chakra system. So through the root, you're vibrating different tones. And so there's just such a beautiful, rich history of mantra, and there's also a really cool modern times interpretation of mantra, because I think that they're all really important depending on what you're doing. Like, I love a beautiful mantra that is like an I am statement. I am, whatever that is, and being able to really focus on that just in meditation alone, how that shifts your energy. And you can kind of.
I've gotten a little bit more interested. I cannot believe I've never read Eat, Pray, Love. I think I told you, and so
I've never read it.
Okay,
but I've never even watched the movie. But
sounds very cliche. But I love Elizabeth Gilbert. I watch a lot of interviews. I think she's so beautiful with her words. I love 100%. Her values. I love her ahas. And I've got a goal of reading, just not really self-help. Maybe you would throw that in there, like given the context of what she does, but. So I'm reading it, and just her awakening around meditation and mantras has really got me a little bit more intrigued because of her journey. And let's just say I've been exploring it a little bit more, and what has come up for me is allowing the disruptions to take over. And she speaks a lot about that in her book. So in that area. So more to come, maybe later. Maybe next year we'll be following up on how the work we've done with our nervous system has impacted us.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's Eat, Pray, Love. I haven't read it. I haven't watched it, but I do think Elizabeth Gilbert's TED Talk, The Elusive Creative Genius, I think that's the name of it. I've seen it a few times, and it is incredible. So highly recommend that.
Anything else with meditation, mantras?
No, I mean, there is so much, but they probably would all warrant like their own deep dive. So, we'll get into different modalities throughout our entire, throughout further episodes outside of the nervous system, because they're just things, that we practice in our daily lives. And I'm really curious and interested in different routes, but I think we kind of hit on, in relation to the nervous system, what's really important is that, we know mindfulness is kind of crucial in being able to retrain your brain, and therefore your body's response and your feelings when, in regard to the nervous system. And meditation is one of the most potent ways, and there are a whole massive variety of modality or of different styles of meditations out there. And you gotta, curate your own kind of toolkit, and play around with it. Maybe it's seasonal. Like, I took a course to learn over 30 styles of meditation, and it's funny, like some I've come back a year later and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm interested in this now. But at the time I thought it was just totally not for me. And so it's really fun to see what resonates at different points and different times, and different experiences warrant maybe different approaches too.
Yeah. And then as you get more exposure to different areas, I mean, I think a game changer for me was when To Be Magnetic does process episodes, and a guest was on and said, no, I fall asleep every time I lay down to meditate. So I literally go hike every time, and it's just a thing now. I know I like every time I go hiking, I put my earbuds in, and I know I'm doing a meditation.
Yeah.
And it there's just a vast difference of what I'm able to tap into and clear and understand than when I am sitting honestly in like a sage scented, energy clear, lay down space, safe space. It's just different for me.
Yeah. What that makes me think of also is the fact that you're a person who, like, I know you regularly work out. Like, that is your jam. Obviously, we love to talk about all the ways that we're totally opposite, because I'm like, I love to do the kind of yoga you can sit down in. But, like, it's interesting, right? So what popped up was just the idea of, like, meditation and a mental vacation for your brain, or focus, or whatever it is that you're doing, that maybe having your body physically doing something is important. And I think that's super cool. The other thing we didn't touch on that I'll just quickly say in relation to meditation is hypnomeditation, which is something that we've kind of both, we talked about it. We talked about To Be Magnetic. We've talked about that before, but I think that there are a lot more, at least I'm seeing, and we know someone soon, soon to come, but I'm seeing more practitioners who are maybe shamanic guides, or they're practicing hypnotherapy, different types of hypnotherapy. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but that's been really interesting to see more of. I saw someone that I did another women's course with in the past. She created an app with, I think, another hypno therapist that she knows, that is like recorded hypnotherapy meditations. I took Sarah Duncan's hypnotherapy session, which was really cool, and I actually really loved hearing the other person on the meditation talk about their experience. And obviously I won't share, it's not for me to share, but I thought that was really cool to see how diverse our experiences could be going through the exact same hypnotherapy. So anyways, that was just,
and she says more to come. We're hoping to get our friend Sarah Duncan on to talk about the benefits of hypnotherapy at some point. So more to come on that, but I think cool call out. Might we transition to havening?
Let's do it.
Cool. So I was introduced to havening this past year from my life coach, which is why this ended up here, and we did a little bit more work just to get some understanding of it. But it's really based on a technique that uses therapeutic touch to treat mental health symptoms by, again, changing those neural pathways in the brain really linked to emotional distress. So it kind of rests on the idea that touch can help boost the production of serotonin in your brain, and that in turn really helps you relax and detach from an upsetting memory or experience. It releases serotonin and, in fact, relieves that mental health symptoms. And so, in short, this approach aims to help you create a quote unquote haven for yourself in one short session, which is where havening derives from.
It's really cool.
Yeah, so this has been something that I've had some sessions on, and I will tell you, it is this crazy release of energy, and definitely seeing the shifts in the nervous system. I think one example that I feel comfortable sharing is just, it'll use that touch in the upper body. And so in this case, you can even do it virtually. They'll show you the technique to touch yourself, but you're using brain disruptions and thought process, and even some EDMR, which we'll talk about in just a minute, to rewire your attachment to a memory, a thought, or a feeling. And sessions are very customized, and they can look different based on what you're bringing to the table when you show up. And the example I'll give, we kind of were working to shift, and really like joy just kept like calling in joy. And when you do this work long enough, the cool thing about it, or let me not even say long enough, I just feel as though I'm at a place in my journey where I can really see the impacts quicker or identify them. And I remember the next session with my havening coach just saying, oh my gosh, I had so much joy. Like after our session, and here's how it showed up, but I wasn't even really understanding in that moment. And so again, I think it goes back to that, the energetics in your body. And if you shift that belief and the thought around what things are and what they may be, that raises your vibration. And it's not surprising with that kind of work that ultimately more joy was coming in to my life.
Yeah.
So
that's so interesting. I wonder, well, I've never done havening, and I only know of it through you, and so I've just been hearing a little bit of
But you brought up, where did you else hear about it? Do you remember the documentary? I hadn't related it back to that. Justin Bieber.
Did I bring it back?
Yeah.
I did?
Yeah, at some point Michelle said, yeah, that's what Justin Bieber did in his documentary.
That is so funny. Clearly, I have that has been removed from my memory.
You're like, why? I was like, no, I think you did. Either way, I think...
That's funny.
Because it's a very new modality, but I didn't even remember that it was that.
I was thinking about, well, with the touch, right? So many things came up, right? We'll talk about EFT tapping. We teased it out in that last, in our nervous system episode, talked a little bit about it. And I think we have it in I think when we talk about body and our physical responses in the nervous system, I think we'll talk a little bit about EFT tapping, but it made me think of that too. And also, of course, my brain went to, trauma is stored in the joints, trauma is stored in the body, or the book, The Body Keeps Score, or every other, piece of incredible material out there that further illustrates the connection of traumatic experiences or, stored within our body. And
it's just the interconnectedness again of all the it's so cool.
And just what we can do physically to start to release some of those emotions that are trapped. I think that's really interesting. It made me think of how the feeling or the conversation around touch has come up multiple times for me in the last couple weeks. I told you about, wanting to do like a little women's group here locally and, with some women that are like a little bit older generation, and what came up in conversations were that physical touch was just super missing. And then I heard today again on a podcast talking about disembodiment and how one of the most powerful tools to start to shift and become more embodied is through touch. And it doesn't mean like you need anyone's help but yourself to be able to touch, and I really mean that in like the safest way, like through these type of modalities, like havening, like EFT tapping, but also like giving yourself a literal hug, like how silly it feels at first, but how necessary it can be, and also how therapeutic just that simple act can be. What would it feel like if you did that every single morning when you woke up and just like gave yourself a hug? What that sensation of touch and love, self-love could do, how subtle and how impactful that can be.
And without getting into, and you'll see, it's like, it's so tempting for us to want to get into the body areas. But Chelsea Jackson Roberts, one of my favorite yoga instructors of Peloton, she does self-love hugs, and it's just movement, and you just are hugging yourself. So I think that's an all-encompassing practice. I love that. Now, EMDR. So again, all of these modalities we want to introduce because we may have not done them ourselves, but we've done a little bit of research. We know that they can help with the mind. So it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. What do you know about this work, Michelle, if much?
Not much.
Okay.
But it came up on my radar some time ago. I think together, like simultaneously, I'm pretty sure that a friend of ours came up. We were in conversation with someone that we had gone to our coaching program with, and this person was doing EMDR, and she kind of put it on our radar. At least for me, this is the first time I had heard about it, and I think it's interesting in the way it differentiates from what I understand, right? Like havening, you're talking about touch and the mental process, or reprogramming your neural pathways, and here you're using I think it's a tool to process traumatic experiences, and it's by being guided to overcome these distressing memories by using guided eye movements. And so it's really interesting to think about that approach? I mean, I really don't know a lot more about it other than it's come up a few times in the last couple years. Like, for example, I've had coaching clients who also were doing this work, and I thought it was really fascinating because, again,
To Be Magnetic highlighted it at some point as well. Maybe that's where you learned a little bit as well.
I think so. I'm sure it's come up so many times, and I think that's why we put it on here, because it's really interesting to think about, you know, when we talk about the different ways that we find relaxation, whether it's through meditation, you know, our body's experiencing different things in different ways. And so perhaps for some, that kind of those like eye movements or however this process is really interesting to help process or reprocess that original trigger or the memory of it. It's really that stressful memory.
And I think what's coming up that I'd love to share is on Karmic Mirror, we don't want to shy away from talking about things just because we're not the expert on them, and we feel that this is a trusted enough modality that if you were curious about it, you would find credible resources to be able to see if that's a modality that might work for you. So while we've not practiced it, we at Karmic Mirror do not want to shy away from highlighting things, because we really, one of our values is letting people show up in ways and practicing modalities that make sense for them and fit for them. And just because we haven't dove deep into it doesn't mean we don't want to highlight it. So
and I think it's just being really true to being curious about certain things. I also think that if you're listening and you've had experience, or maybe you are an EMDR practitioner, a Havening practitioner, or you want to shed light on some of these modalities, send us a message, because that's really what it's about. We're not here to kind of, you know, research everything and then pretend to be the experts, although there's going to be some areas where we totally are, and I think it's really nice to have that balance of not knowing everything, of getting to show up and be curious. But we would love to connect with you if that's something that you feel like you are an expert in, or that you know, and you want to come on and share about it.
Yeah, great transition into things that we have not necessarily practiced, so we can't speak from experience, but we did want to highlight, and again, we are not medical professionals, and we would always say do your research, do your due diligence, but we are talking about mind-altering substances, so maybe the latest trend, just microdosing, psychedelics, mushroom, LSD, and that area. So what do we know in this area of why we put this in mind and how it can positively potentially impact the nervous system?
Gosh, okay, so I think one, I would say, like Ali said, we're not experts in this area or have done a ton of psychoactive mind-altering substances. However, I am so intrigued by the new research, the new studies, and all of the new materials that have been coming out in the last few years. Well, really, our whole lifetime, truly, or things that are coming back around now. And one of my, someone I think, you can see him on Netflix, you can see him read his book, Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, really dug into, and I think he's on a ton of different podcasts too that just go deeper into it, but he really looks at different psychoactive plants and he deep dives into what they can do. So for example, psilocybin, we know that's magic mushrooms, and there's just so many therapeutic experts out there that are working with some of these substances to be able to, how could I say this in a really gentle, but also just
well, they're starting to do more research, and so I think that there's research backed by science and medical professionals where there are areas. I know someone who just opened up a practice in Nashville, and I'd be happy to link her information in the show notes, that you'd probably find more research and science backed information in this area. But when I had connected with her, we were talking through her practice, and because it was just like kind of a networking connection thing. The main message here, I think, is that work with somebody who's done that due diligence and that background knowledge on it, and see if it is the intended outcome. Because I've had friends who have gone and done ayahuasca and who have done these types of retreats, and game changer for healing in areas.
Yeah, I think that a lot of these treatments are from my understanding able to help you kind of process those really, really deeper rooted emotions or experiences, help you process them. And when they're done with the right guidance, with the right support, you can really do some deep excavation.
Well, it's saying that it interacts with the serotonin receptors in the brain, so it can give you a heightened sense of connectedness, and can treat conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD. And again, always speak to a medical professional. This is just the research that we saw, so we wanted to make sure we highlighted that.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and also because it's really, you have to be responsible. I mean, with something like psilocybin, right? I think it's probably a little bit more popular and easier to obtain. You can take chocolates, things like that with psilocybin. And if they're not done with intention, things like this, you're just, recreational partying, do you? But also if your goal is nervous system regulation, processing, healing, being able to move through your life from a really more stable, emotionally, physically, mentally stable place and be able to really thrive. These type of psychoactive, substances, I think can really maybe I don't want to say backfire, but they can really, because they're focusing on your brain's functions, you can really
some people
do
will
some
say
damage.
is they'll say if you're doing, this is what I was told through conversation of someone who's researched and is getting licensed, of you can do a lot of damage if you're doing it to your brain and, the chemicals in your brain if you're doing it on a regular basis. And so let's just throw that.
Yeah, I think it's just really being responsible.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think last, let's talk about, we've talked through some of the modalities, right? We've kind of talked about how the brain works and why that's important in regulating the nervous system, some of those modalities that you might lean into to help you start to regulate that nervous system. And now just the practical tips for where might you start? How might you incorporate this into your life? So I'll toss the ball to you, Michelle. What might be one or two practical tips you would want to start with for our listeners of how to start integrating into this space for a healthier nervous system?
Yeah. Okay. Number one, with everything, every single, any change, I think is just baby steps or really practical, manageable steps, right? To be able to do anything is like, start with what you can, what works for your lifestyle as is. It is super important. And so on practical ways, I think like learning how to breathe again, learning how to breathe into your belly, because that alone is a huge, powerful tool. If we're constantly breathing really shallow, we're going to feel totally disconnected and off the ground, right? Like if we're breathing deep into our body, into our belly, we're bringing ourselves back down to earth, we're grounding. And so just something so simple as learning how to breathe again consciously can totally spiral in a beautiful spiral into more things.
And you can find, that's the cool thing these days, that there's free trials to basically everything. If there's also just so much access to different meditations, different areas you can do breath work. I'm going to shout you out. You're putting together some breath work things that we'll make sure we highlight and tag below in the show notes. But also, Peloton has meditation. There's Calm.
Everywhere.
Chani Nichols, who's an astrologer, has meditations in her app. I just wanted, where do you find, YouTube, where else might, if they're looking for different?
Gosh, literally anywhere nowadays. Truly, we can share, but ultimately, I think there's a wealth of information out there, and there's a wealth of different apps that you can pick up. Start with what feels exciting to you, and just,
I think another tip or practical tip for infusing this type of work we were talking through is creating a comfortable and dedicated space for your practice, whatever that looks like for your brain. And that is maybe very biased, but for someone who has an overactive brain, I really do need a clean, clutter-free space. Yeah. And I think it's also why maybe I lean towards meditation outside, because you're literally in nature and walking, and there's, you just feel free and clean and airy, but whatever that might look like for you, because again, the presence and the mindfulness might be pretty challenging if you don't have that space. Now, we also recognize everybody is not privy to being able to get outdoors or having quiet space, but just to whatever extent you can do. Sometimes for me, it's just lighting my favorite incense, and that's going to be my little elevated to my atmosphere when I can't get outside because it's snowing, whatever that might look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like the most doable.
Yeah.
If getting up and, if you know that once you leave your bed, you're not going to practice or you're not going to do anything, then sit up in bed and do some deep breathing. Yeah. And do what you can do.
And I would say just another one we were talking, obviously utilize guided resources from experts. And I would say a lot of people that don't necessarily fit into, right, of course there's therapy and those different modalities, but I would say probably the havening work, the hypnotherapists, I would say in those spaces, a lot of times they offer free consultations. So you can talk with them about what you're looking to get out of it. They will explain more in depth their process and the benefits to their practice. So I would say for those of you who might feel weird, having a consultation, don't, because they want someone who's just as good of a fit for them as it is for you. So I would just say lean into those experts and don't be afraid, maybe in the holistic space more so, to reach out and be inquisitive to practitioners, because I think they will open you with welcome arms to help you understand more about how that can impact your nervous system, right?
Yeah, for sure. We talked a little bit about kind of, we combine a few different modalities because everyone's different, and you're going to want, maybe you are a person who really thrives on consistency and routine, and that yoga class first thing when you wake up is it for you, and that really works for you. But maybe you're someone like me who needs to switch it up, and maybe it's seasonal. I think there's maybe there's no rhyme or reason, but you need to kind of mix it up and switch it up, and so I think just giving yourself the flexibility to be able to do that, and the point is that you're doing something and you're doing it regularly in the ways that you can, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, because it's a journey, especially when you're talking about changing those neural pathways. Repetition really plays a key role in adjusting those neural pathways to set your nervous system on maybe a more positive trajectory of when it's quote unquote triggered. So really, I think we always lean into this one, but just reiterating again, being kind to yourself and giving yourself grace. For some of you, you may just be interested on, like, this may have prompted something in you to say, I wonder if my trauma is dysregulating my nervous system. And that can be in itself just a shock to your system to realize. Just make that realization. So be kind, be gentle with yourself, celebrate the small wins. Again, think of my interview example, right? Like, even though my nervous system was so thrown off in that whole entire process, what I really leaned into was just celebrating myself for being so present and so aware of what was going on, where I could say, like, your nervous system is out of whack, and maybe I didn't have the time to get it back together, but I do know that served me well, because I didn't pick up the phone and say I couldn't do this. Right? So just self-love, self-care, self-compassion. Any other practical tips for infusing this, or resources that we might not have mentioned?
No, I think we covered a lot. Definitely, I think we covered a lot here. I think when we talk about being kind and gentle with yourself, it's I think it goes hand in hand with kind of like relinquishing some control for anything to go a certain way, other than to just be in the process, right? Like, practice being present, being mindful in the moment while you're trying the thing, even if it's not for you or doesn't go as planned. That's the whole point, is just like really letting yourself be with or observe whatever does come up. That's the real gold versus like the end result, because there is no end result. It's a constant practice of coming back to yourself.
So as we close our conversation, before we get into our self-love check-in, we just highlighted a little bit about the brain functionality and how that is connected to not only your nervous system, but how it is interconnected between the body and spirit as well. keep your eye out for our upcoming body and spirit nervous system podcasts. We also talked about the different modalities that you might be able to start leaning into if you're interested to do some really positive, impactful work in the mind for the nervous system regulation. And then, of course, we just peppered in some of those practical tips. Did I miss anything, Michelle, or are we cool to jump into our self-love check-in?
Let's do it. I'll ask you. So, how are you practicing self-love in your thoughts this week or whenever?
I think as of late, as I may have touched on, I'm getting really interested in how I can get more mindful in my mind and presence. And so I think, I don't know what that looks like, but how I've really leaned into it is just giving myself a lot of grace of when I feel my brain spiraling on the future or the past of maybe this is more an affirmation, but you're exactly where you need to be. And what's meant for you won't miss you is like a long tenured affirmation of mine, and really being in that space. And I think allowing that, just again, continuing to see when my nervous system is out of balance is again like in my mind, because for me I think it shows up there first and foremost always. So practicing self-love through my thoughts is just how can I reframe those. Oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you that I had the coolest Uber ride home with this man who within like 2 minutes started talking about A Course in Miracles.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I have this beautiful, he was recommending all these books for me. And I asked him if I could start recording our conversation because I just wanted to be engaged in the conversation. And so I think it comes up for me now because this is a good example of like reframing, you know, for me and my mind and my thoughts. You know, I kind of said to him, I said, that's what's challenging for me. I just have a really overactive mind. And so it's hard for me. And he said, oh, well, that's the reason why you're becoming so enlightened is because you have the capacity to think so deeply about all of these things. And I was just like, William. So I think those things I really lean into when practicing self-love is that our brain, again, is not meant to make us happy. And all of that data was meant to serve me at a certain time, but being loving about letting it go now that it's not. So let me throw that back at you. Lately, how do you practice self-love when it comes to your thoughts in the mind?
Gosh, I could have totally gone on a tangent on that because I was just listening to something about pleasure, contentment, embodiment, and the Uber driver came up.
Can you highlight it? That's cool.
Oh my God. Just talking about aspects of embodiment, and I'm going to totally butcher the words, but I won't get into this because I think there's way more to it, but there were pleasure and contentment, or I think it's like hedonism and eudaimonia. Anyways, talking about things that we really need, and those little bits of pleasure can, yes, it's like the deeper pleasure of being in connection with someone or feeling feelings of love, but it also can happen and is also necessary in our life in those smaller moments, like being in an Uber and having a really meaningful, intentional conversation that just totally took you by surprise, like those moments of awe or just, like in wonder, and how important those are to not just to your life, to, all the things, because pleasure is so important. And we are also so talking about disembodiment, so disconnected from pleasure. But how, it's just really fascinating because it was literally just this morning on the walk with the dogs as I listening to this.
No, I love that you bring that up. I think you always should. That's the beauty of Karmic Mirror, because
totally. But so
it's coming up for you. I'm sure somebody else is having that thought or might love that connection that you're making as well. But also, I think if you're bringing that full circle, think about the journey of what I was telling you. My nervous system was out of whack in that interview of like being seen, and then diving deeper into, well, what is that about, of like people are going to judge you, or it's like such a negative thing, you're overthinking in the details. And even how doing that work, the universe is now energetically bringing me these strangers, these Uber drivers who are literally making me feel seen in a positive way, as opposed to where I think my perception was that piece is like a negative thing. Right? That impacts the nervous system. Like, don't be seen. And so it's just, I don't know, it's a full circle, but it's cool.
Super.
but I do want you to share what came to you aside from...
Okay. So how am I practicing self-love in my thoughts, mentally, as I continue my practice of doing things out of my comfort zone or just being really aware of my discomfort and thinking about the nervous system? I think something that came up recently was just like, and you made me think of it too with the reframing, right? Like part of this embodiment aspect of tuning into your physical sensations and part of the reframe conversation is that we tend, yes, reframing is, like you're reframing our perspective, our narrative on something, you're widening your perspective, but also expanding it to the physical. Like, yes, I'm uncomfortable, but what else is there? And let me get out of my head and let me just be with what else is happening in my body and be with it without even trying to make sense of it. I think that's for me, that's such self-love, because the more opportunities I give myself to tune into my body and not try to make logical sense of things, the more connected I get to myself, if that makes total sense. But being
does it lend me into human design a little bit?
Well, that's exactly it, right? Like being a sacral manifesting generator, being someone who is not, with an open head, open ajna. Like I'm not here to constantly be trying to make sense of anything. I'm here to feel. My strongest sense is literally feeling. So everything in my body, everything in how I'm made up is here to feel, but I also am so impressionable mentally that I can easily go into wanting to do and think my way into so many things. So when I do feel this discomfort, right, of or when I do feel things, letting myself really reframe from a sense, from a physical standpoint of yes, also I can reframe a lot of, it's such a natural skill for me to reframe just about everything. And I think that just speaks to, for me, resilience through life experiences, being able to shift from being someone who really can compartmentalize for safety and protection into being able to understand how compartmentalization can help me in a healthier way, or from not taking on so much emotion that doesn't necessarily belong to me. So all that to say, I think the self-love piece is totally about just letting myself be okay, what else am I feeling? What am I feeling? Is it physical? What am I feeling energetically? And letting that be enough, because the more I do that, the more I practice it, the less I make sense of things, and the more I deepen my inner trust, my intuition, my sacral knowing. I tune into that.
And just how it's so interconnected. And when we're talking about human design, we are going to have an episode that touches on that. So I think it'll resonate a little bit more there. But if I might, again, a practical tip, because it's something that came up for me when you were talking about that, is, again, it's that mind and body and spirit connection. And so for you, it's slowing the mind down to get more in your feeling. And my best friend told me, because looking back on moments where my nervous system was definitely not regulated, and there were behaviors associated with that then, an hour-ish, 2 hours later, you're just I wish I wouldn't have reacted that way, or I wouldn't have done XYZ. And maybe it's sometimes as easy as she just said, girl, next time, put on Higher Love and play it as many times as you need to play it until those feelings pass. And so I just wanted to throw it in there, because I think when you were talking, it's that little bit of disruption of
totally.
I know I'm about to not act like myself, so where can I get the pause? Where can I take it until I get back in? So I just wanted to shout out my bestie Mimi for that sound advice, because it's something that I use, and it doesn't have to be Higher Love, people. It's just whatever song will bring you those good vibes, kind of take you into a different place. But I think that is a great place to stop for today in regards to the nervous system. Please make sure you check back so that you can catch our full episodes on the body and spirit as they relate to the nervous system. Be blessed. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you resonated with what you heard today, join us in this vibrant community of seekers, dreamers, and creators. Find us on Instagram at Karmic Mirror Podcast and stay connected with us for additional content, updates, and more. We love hearing from our community and engaging in conversations.
You can catch all our episodes anywhere you listen to podcasts, so make sure to subscribe. And if you really love what you're hearing, we'd be so grateful if you would leave us a 5-star review or share with someone who might benefit from our content. Your feedback means the world to us.
As we bid you farewell, we encourage you to embrace the ever-unfolding story of your life. Life's too short for a one-size-fits-all approach. Remember, your path to flourishing is uniquely yours.
Until next time on the Karmic Mirror, stay true, stay curious, and always be kind to yourself.